Welcome to our second OSEEL Guides workshop. I'm so thrilled that all of you all are here. You came back after our first month, which is exciting for me and our team. And today we're going to talk about effective communication, parent engagement, conflict resolution, and due process. And what I want you to recognize as we go through today is you're not getting the full picture of all of the work that's going on in these areas. However, we want you to recognize that these are areas you need to be familiar with. These are areas that as a part of your job as a DOS or a preschool program coordinator, you need to dive in a little bit more and have a good awareness and understanding of these areas. So as we get started today, Brinley, if you want to go to the next slide. Again, that's our agenda for today. And you will hear from several people from TACE, and you will also hear from Carol Ann Morrison, who is the director of the Division of IDA Monitoring and Results from KDE and OSEEL, and you will hear from Shasta Hensley, who is a state transformation specialist with OSEEL in the Division of IDA Implementation and Preschool. And so you may be familiar with those names, but I want you to recognize those two people as people you can reach out to in the areas that they discuss today. We want you to, as a part of this meeting, we want you to attend and participate. So block this time off in your calendars. I've seen the agenda. I've heard parts and pieces of the presentations, and we're in for a really great treat today with what this work is going to be. Turn your cameras on. We wish this could be in person. So if you have your cameras on, we can see your faces. I'm a face person, like a body language person. So if I see confusion or frustration, I might pause and say, hey, let's talk about this a little bit more. Please ask questions. This is your training. So ask questions in chat or unmute and ask away. And then be ready at the end to share your immediate next step. We want you to be able to use what you learn in these workshops and think about, okay, within the next week in my job, I need to do this. Okay, that is our norms for today, and we are ready to get started. Norm, I will turn it over to you and the TACE team.
Thank you, Alicia. We're just honored to be with you, and I just get to sit and listen today, but Norm Ames here with you, Director of the Center for Technical Assistance for Excellence in Special Education. And super excited to have Mr. Greg Abel with us, who is a longtime partner and friend and consultant with TACE. And I'll turn it over to Greg, and then we'll continue on with the workshop. So thanks very much, Greg.
Thank you, Norm. And from my perspective, it's good morning. I'm not sure about you, but good morning from the Pacific Northwest. Behind me is Mount Hood. I live in the Seattle area, specifically Bainbridge Island, and I partner with TACE in the Center for Special Ed Leadership and Conflict Engagement, which is a new initiative that we've created under the umbrella of TACE. I've worked in IDA for, hate to say it, 45 years. Started in 1980 as a school psychologist, was a special ed administrator. After 15 years, left IDEA, I thought, and entered the dispute resolution field, and came back and responded to an RFP to design the special ed mediation system for the state of Washington. And now we consult nationally in dispute resolution for the last 30 years under the IDEA. So I'm going to focus primarily on conflict. I'm going to touch on family engagement, but my area of focus is really more conflict, but want to relate it to that particular context. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Let's just start with a basic definition of conflict. Interpersonal conflict occurs when two or more people interact with each other, and based on the interaction, they perceive or interpret some level of incompatible difference or threat. So I want to stop there for a moment and just start with, where does conflict start? Conflict starts between your ears. It does not start somewhere out here between you and I. It starts between your ears as to how you interpret a context in which you find yourself. And you're interpreting the situation indicate a presence of some incompatible difference between us and a sense of threat of that. Going on, the threat can be perceived in a number of different areas. It can be perceived as a threat to our resources, a threat to our needs, a threat to our values. Suffice it to say that most often conflict is not about what you think it's about, okay? And if you look at 30 years of mediation data from our state, the issues that show up more often than any others in IDEA are not about placement, they're not about ESY, they're not about related services, it's about communication. And typically at the heart of a breakdown in the context of communication. In that context, then we behave and respond in certain ways that will either escalate or de-escalate the conflict. And so recognizing the choices we make when we experience conflict are going to significantly impact our experience of that particular conflict. So next slide, please. In 40 years of working in education, I find in general, and again, this is a bit of a gross generalization, is educators tend to not have a very healthy conflict relationship. Educators tend to not be conflict aversive. They tend to avoid conflict. And so, individually we have different relationships with conflict, but in general, I think in education as a context, we have this relationship to conflict is let's just not go there. One of my favorite writers in education is Roland Barthes, and he talks about every school he's ever worked in has what he calls the undiscussables. Those things that we know we should be talking about, but we typically don't talk about them for fear of the potential conflict that's going to emerge. So we have an approach avoidance conflict relationship. I know I should have this conversation. I don't want to have this conversation. In the book, Crucial Conversations, they talk about a silence or violence. I tend to avoid until I can't avoid anymore, and then I blow up on you. We have different styles for dealing with conflict. In the Thomas Kilmann conflict mode style inventory, they say we can be very competitive, we can be accommodating, we avoid, we compromise, we collaborate. But here's the most important piece for me. Conflict has two equal potentials. Conflict and the result of our engagement conflict has the potential to erode trust and to erode social capital. Social capital being relationships of reciprocity. But conflict has the equal potential to build trust and to build social capital. And it's been said that conflicting ideas and perspectives is the source of innovation and creativity. New learning occurs in the context of conflict. Conflict moves us outside our comfort zone and invites us into our discomfort zone to explore areas that we're not aware of. And in that context is where innovation and creativity occurs. In that context is where we engage in what Ronald Heifetz talks about as adaptive work. Okay, next slide, please. In a book called Staying with Conflict by Dr. Bernie Mayer, who is a very, very well-known mediator and was a professor at Creighton University in Nebraska on dispute resolution, identified in his book what he calls the 6 phases of conflict. And the first 5 phases of conflict go from what he calls low impact conflict to stubborn conflict, okay? Low impact conflict is things like, where do you want to go for dinner? Those kinds of things. Stubborn conflict at the higher end of that is really more complex. It's often conflict within an organization where there's what I call a lot of moving parts, different, lots of people, different departments, different agencies. And basically, without going into details, what is common between the first 5 phases of conflict is that given sufficient intervention, you may resolve those conflicts. So the idea of alternative dispute resolution, the idea of dispute resolution makes sense in that particular, in those contexts, okay? That if we put in the energy and the resources, we can resolve the conflict. But he introduces what for me has been a fundamental shift in my thinking, the 6th phase of conflict, which he refers to as enduring conflict. And what differentiates enduring conflict from other conflict is that enduring conflict is fundamentally not resolvable. You can't resolve it because it's built into the system. It's deeply identity-based. It's deep-rooted. And we'll come back and talk about that in a moment. Now, I heard Dr. Mayer speak at a conference a number of years ago as he was introducing this book and these ideas and introducing the notion of enduring conflict. And people said, so, Dr. Mayer, what are examples of enduring conflict? People say, well, is that the Middle East? Is that, Northern Ireland? And one of the first examples he gave, I found kind of humorous. You may or may not, depends on who you are. But he said, marriage is an example of enduring conflict. I've been married for 47 years, and my wife and I went to high school together, and yet there are things at this stage in life which we will still never agree. Okay, we will never agree. Now, are those deal breakers? No, those are issues that we engage in. As those issues arise in our relationship, we engage them. We don't resolve them, but we reach agreements that maintain the relationship, maintain our commitment to mutual purpose moving forward. Then he gave the example, he said, special education is an example of enduring conflict. And that to me was a profound shift in the way that I thought about this. Now, as I thought about, so what's an example of that? An example would be an IEP team annually addressing FAPE. If I'm a parent, how will I define FAPE? Whatever I think my child needs. If I'm an educator, and I've been a parent, my son was on an IEP, he's now an adult and doing well, but as a parent, that's what FAPE was for me. As an educator, what is FAPE? Whatever is appropriate, whatever the heck that means, which we're still trying to negotiate and figure that out. That creates a dissonance in the team that will manifest itself over time. We will come back and engage the current iterations of that dissonance, and we won't resolve it. I spent 8 years teaching at the University of Washington in a 2-year program for special ed administrators, and one of my strand was for personal leadership. But what I told people, I said, listen, as a special ed administrator, you need to look at your relationship to conflict. If your relationship to conflict is something that is bad and it needs to be fixed, you're going to be really frustrated in this job. You need to learn to be with conflict. Now, you could say, if we're dealing with enduring conflict, well, I would just avoid it, because if it can't be resolved, let's just not address it. And he goes, no, you can't avoid it. You have to engage it over time. So he introduces this notion of, as opposed to alternative dispute resolution, he introduces this notion of conflict engagement. We actually rebranded our company. We are no longer an alternative dispute resolution firm. We're a conflict engagement firm. And we help build systems that will facilitate the ongoing engagement of conflict, and will build capacity for the ongoing engagement of conflict. Next slide, please. Just go ahead and hit them all. Characteristics of enduring conflict: deeply rooted, identity-based, embedded in the structure, again, systemic and complex, rooted in distrust, reactive de-evaluation, which means, oh, I'm a parent and you're an educator, therefore we are automatically in conflict. You are not to be trusted, I'm not to be trusted. Involve fundamental issues of power. The point being that when you're dealing with enduring conflict, you have to maintain communication. You have to maintain engagement. You have to maintain the relationship. You need to maintain communication with people whom you would just as soon not communicate. And no offense, I don't mean this to be offensive, but I've noticed it too much. You don't delegate communication to your attorneys. You and your staff need to build the capacity to be in relationship and to maintain communication in contexts that are very difficult. I'm finding more and more examples of staff particularly saying, my staff doesn't want to meet with those parents. I don't want to meet with that parent. And I'm going, I'm sorry, that's part of the job. We have to figure out how to do that. And I'll give you some examples of that. Next slide, please. This is one of my favorite quotes from who I mentioned earlier. Roland Barthes writes this, or an article called Improving Relationships in the Schoolhouse. It's in Ed Leadership, about 2006, if you're interested. He starts the article with this statement: one incontrovertible finding emerges from my career spent working in and around schools. The nature of the relationships among the adults within a school, and that's not just the teachers and administrators and the paraeducators, this is parents also, has a greater influence on the character and quality of that school and on student accomplishment than anything else. You know, our ability to maintain healthy relationships with the families we serve manifests itself in improved student performance. And there's a lot of data that supports this. This is not just his opinion. This is based on significant data that in schools where there's a healthy environment and trust and respect among the adults within the system, you will see markedly improvement in student performance. And in the buildings where there's a lack of trust and lack of respect among the adults within the system, there's a statistical drop in student performance. Now, for me, this was important because I consider myself, while I've worked in dispute resolution for the last 30 years, I'm an educator. And I always kind of wondered, like, what is the relationship of the work that I do to student performance? Because that's the question we as educators always ask. How will it improve student performance? And when I read this, I'm going, I get it now. You know, the work that we're doing in building healthy relationships is doing that. Moving on, please. Just a couple of articles, and my colleagues beyond me or after me are going to go more in depth of this, but this is just a couple of quotes from an article put out by Cadre. The evidence is consistent, positive, and convincing. Families have a major influence on their children's achievement in schools and through life. Yes, we know that. The message is clear. It's simply impossible to have an island of excellence in the sea of community indifference. And when parents become school partners, the results can be consequential and enduring. Now, in my years working in IDA since 1980, there's been a shift. When IDA came out in 70, whatever it was, 75, there was a sense of hope that we're finally going to be working together in service of kids. And that sense of hope has been lost recently. Oh, I have to work with these people. And we need to deconstruct what I would call the deeply embedded conflict story, defining this relationship in order to better serve the kids that we serve. The next slide, please. The combination, this is one of my favorites. Fisher studied the source of conflict about special education between schools and parents, finding that the combination of systemic cracks, limited resources, staff attrition, restrictive mandates in the nation's educational system, and the failure of professionals and parents to use effective communication and collaboration were found to be the major source of conflict. Okay. As I said earlier, the number one factor showing up in mediations in our state over the 30 years is communication, to break down the relationship. It's not necessarily about the law. In some cases, people are taking it on and saying, this is a legal dispute. I'm going, at the surface level, it's a legal dispute. At a deeper level, it's a relationship breakdown. And that is proven consistently in the work that we've been doing in our state. So we talk about engaging in preventative problem solving. Okay, so next slide, please. Here's an example of a webinar that Cadre, and Cadre is the OSEP-funded technical assistance program for dispute resolution and special education. They did a webinar a while back with the Poway Unified School District in California, and the work that they did to fundamentally shift the relationship between families and educators in their district. It's for a large district north of San Diego, 35,000 students, and they recognized that they had a very dysfunctional system in relationship to families. And so the webinar shows the work that they did and how they did that work, and it shows the data. And what I think is important about this, they've got really amazing data showing the shift in the relationship and the impact it has. We're actually getting ready to do a second webinar with Poway to go deeper into what was necessary for them to achieve the results that they achieved. So I really highly recommend, if you want to be inspired, it's a pretty amazing webinar. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we've developed and focused on, and this is something that's available through Cadre is that under the TACE Center for Special Ed Leadership and Conflict Engagement, we offer an MTSS framework for building capacity for effectively engaging conflict. Now, we adopted an MTSS framework primarily because it's a model, it's a framework that's fully understood by most educators. It's a tiered system of building supports in an instructional context, in a social, emotional, behavioral context. And so we created a framework for building local capacity for conflict engagement using this framework. In Tier 1, and we offer a series of classes in Tier 1, it's really focused on how do I individually shift my relationship to conflict? How do I improve my capacity to navigate interpersonal conflict, not just between the families that I work with, but on the teams in which I work. In my family, I mean, everything we teach as applicable outside the context of the IDEA, okay? And so we have a class called, a foundational class called Engaging Challenging Conversations. We have a class on building and effective teaming kind of context. We then offer Tier 2, and Tier 2 is based on, is designed to build capacity within the community. So in Tier 1, you're developing skills in service of yourself. In Tier 2, you're developing skills in service of others. And so in Tier 2, we're training in basically 3 contexts. One, we're training facilitators. And one of the differences that we're not training IEP facilitators, we're training facilitators who can effectively facilitate an IEP meeting and any other kind of engagement where groups of people come together to do shared work. So we're really building into the community, into the context, this idea of facilitation. The second skill we're focusing on is conflict coaching. Coaching has grown exponentially in the last number of years and it's become specialized. You have executive coaches, you have life coaches, you have health and wellness coaches, you have spiritual coaches. And so there's also a growing field of conflict coaching. How can you come alongside someone and partner with them in their engagement of their conflict? And how, as you as a member of the community, can you provide that particular resource? And then this third skill we're focusing on is how do you teach these skills to others? So we would love to build the capacity in your community to be able to teach the Tier 1 resources, to teach those skills to your system, to your paraeducators, to your psychologists and your speech and language people, and anybody within the system. When we get to Tier 3 in our system, it's really about developing your more state level resources. So we train special ed mediators at the SEA level, IEP facilitators who are providing services at a state level. And so we create this then tiered system of resources where you have embedded in your community and much closer to the local context, skills for navigating and engaging conflict. And my ultimate goal is for people to change their relationship to conflict. I do find it interesting if conflict is a context for all new learning, and yet we have an aversion to conflict, then we have an aversion to the context where much of our new learning occurs. And I think as educators, we need to maybe confront that challenge and to see what we can do with it. So I can't remember if there's another slide after this or not. Is that it?
That is the final slide. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Let's open it up for a bit here. Got a couple minutes left. Not hearing anything, and I'm not seeing the chat, so I'm not sure if Alicia's anything showing up in chat. Okay, well, I give my remaining 4 minutes to the next person. Okay, so back to Norm or Alicia.
Okay, thanks, Greg. I believe I am next with parent involvement and indicator 8. And talking about conflict and engaging in conflict leads right into involving parents in school and your interactions with them. And I guess first I should introduce myself. I'm forgetting the main part, but I'm Brenda Smith. I'm an associate director at TACE, and I have been involved with helping states with their indicator 8 parent involvement survey and reporting for 11 years. But this topic is really important to me as a parent of students with IEPs myself, I've been in situations where school staff have made me feel very involved with my children's education and with their special education services. And then I've been in situations where, different messages sent by school staff have made me not feel so involved. So this is a topic that I am very passionate about. So let's jump in. Thanks, Brinley, for switching sides. So what is parent involvement? And I have a quote here from Comer 2005, which feels like it's going to be a little bit of an old source, but I love this quote. And it is the year I got married, so I don't feel like it's too old. But they say academic learning is an acquired interest that students usually gain through social, emotional, and cognitive interactions with meaningful others. And meaningful others are people in their lives who are important to them, like their parents, their caregivers, their family members. And so we know that children pick up on whether or not to place importance on academics from those family members, those people who are meaningful in their lives. So when parents feel involved at schools, when they feel like their input, their interactions are valued, then that helps them to place more value on what their students, their children are doing in schools. And those children then develop importance and interest in academic learning. So parent participation can take on many forms. Attending school meetings like parent-teacher conference and IEPs is parent involvement. Helping kids with homework is parent involvement. Volunteering and participating in school programs. Being an advocate on behalf of their student counts as parent involvement, and participating on school decision-making teams. And part of your role at the school district level is helping parents understand when they're involved, because there's a point in my life, if you'd asked me, am I involved at my child's school, I would have been like, no, I'm not an active PTA member, I'm not volunteering to help out with assemblies or field trips. But what I didn't realize is I'm going to IEP meetings, I'm going to parent-teacher conference, I'm helping my child remember to, sign off on their reading sheet at night. So I was being involved, but I didn't know I was being involved as a parent. Next slide. So we know there's a lot of benefits of parent involvement. Children with parents who are actively involved and place importance on their education, they show improved academic outcomes. They have higher rankings of success. Those parents, in turn, become education advocates within the community, helping to make sure there are supports in place at the school, that there are supports for teachers and school staff. And so it's really reciprocal. Once your parents are involved in your school, you're going to see benefits as well. Next slide. So just a few more quotes to add in here. Involved parents are more likely to exhibit positive attitudes and behaviors toward their school, and their children are more likely to demonstrate passing grades. The second quote is for those of you who need numbers to back this up, but looking at 52 different studies found that parent involvement had a significant effect on student grades and on standardized test results. And then academic socialization was more strongly related to student academic achievement in comparison to home-based or school-based parental involvement. So talking about academic socialization, that's when parents and caregivers are helping children place that importance on education. So that matters more on whether or not the parents are actually in the school. It's that attitude they're teaching their children towards academics. Next slide. So we know there are a lot of benefits to parent involvement, but we also know it's not always easy. So we kind of have this paradox where parents are saying that they have no opportunities to participate and collaborate at their schools. And then you have teachers who are reporting that they can't get parents to come to IEP meetings. And then a second study just showing that families report they want to be more involved, and teachers are saying they want more training on how to work with families. So there's this interesting paradox where parents and families don't feel like they're involved, but teachers feel like they can't get those parents involved. Next slide. So I think I've covered pretty well why parent involvement is important. So let's talk about it specifically with what is required in IDEA. So one goal of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is to strengthen the role of parents and ensuring families have meaningful opportunities to participate in the education of their children. So you notice I bolded that they need meaningful opportunities to participate. So we're not just checking a box, we're making this meaningful because we know that that parent involvement can increase outcomes for students with disabilities. So under IDEA, parent involvement looks like self-determination. It looks like self-advocacy from students and their families. It looks like real and informed choice. And it looks like active participation in the decision-making process. Next slide, Brinley. So to include parents in the IEP process, schools must provide parents with prior written notice of the IEP. So these are pretty much the checkbox requirements under IDEA that you are monitored on at your school district to make sure it's happening. So prior written notice. The IEP meeting needs to include a review of parental rights, and that really should be, more than just handing a parent a booklet and saying, here's your rights, checking, does the family want to go over those rights? Do they have any questions? It should be more than just checking the box. It should hopefully lead to some conversation and making sure that parents understand their part of the IEP process. And then finally, and very importantly, parents and the student as appropriate should be active participants in the IEP meeting to determine the student's disability classification. So during that initial evaluation process, parent input should be gathered on what the ultimate classification for the disability will be. And then the school setting placement, very important because, and that's in reference to least restrictive environment. The LRE decision is based on the IEP team, and parents are an integral part of the IEP team. And so their input on the least restrictive environment placement of the student is vital to ensuring that that is appropriate for the student. And then the IEP goals as well. There should be parent input on what the goals are, how they're being measured, and making sure that the parent agrees with that and, that it's something that's attainable for their student and they're behind that. Next slide, please. So I want to talk a little bit about how this looks in practice because, you have those things that you're required to do, but sometimes it's difficult and we want to be very practical about it. So sometimes it's, as I mentioned, even difficult to just get parents to the IEP meeting. And so that can sometimes throw up roadblocks to making sure that they are fully involved in the IEP process and they are part of that decision-making team. And then at the school level, sometimes there's difficulties with personnel workloads. In preparation for the IEP meeting, a lot of work can be done towards parent involvement as far as communicating before and after, or the parents getting, updated reports on how their student is doing on their IEP goals. How long are you taking with the IEP meeting? Did your staff have an opportunity to feel like they're fully prepped going into the IEP meeting so they're ready to have discussions with parents? And sometimes caseloads are so heavy for personnel that they don't feel prepped going into IEP meetings, or they haven't had those opportunities to reach out to parents and do appropriate communication. And sometimes that can be a barrier to school staff working with parents at the level they want to be. And then the final one is that parents are unaware of how to fully participate or are intimidated by the school system. And as I mentioned before, sometimes parents don't even understand when they're being involved in schools, or they don't know when to step in. Or, they've looked at the parents' rights book, but they're unsure what things mean and they're intimidated to ask. And I can just say from personal experience, from someone who knows, what the requirements of an IEP meeting are kind of inside and out, I do these kind of trainings all the time. I'm intimidated sometimes at an IEP meeting. You're there, with school administration, you're there with specialized staff who, have different content knowledge than you have, and you kind of feel like they're the authority, but you're a little bit timid about speaking up and talking about what you're seeing with the students. So I just do encourage at IEP meetings, parents know their students best, and if they're seeing something at home and they bring it up, it's worthwhile noting. And that's a two-way communication street. If you're seeing something different in the classroom, asking a parent if they're seeing it at home, I'm betting they are. And so having those kind of conversations can help parents become more at ease and help them not be as intimidated and be more participatory in the IEP meeting. Okay, let's jump over to the nuts and bolts on the next slide with the APR, the Annual Performance Report. So under IDEA, and I'm pretty sure this was covered a little bit in the previous webinar, what the APR is, but every 6 years, each state is asked to put together a state performance plan. And in this state performance plan, they set targets for the indicators on which measure how IDEA is being implemented in each state. And so each year, the state puts together an annual performance report and compares their results to the targets that were set in the SPP. Next slide. So indicator 8 on the APR measures parent involvement. And it does this by measuring the percent of parents with a child receiving special education services who report their child's school facilitates parent involvement as a means of improving services and results for children with disabilities. And it's pretty simple. It's just the number of parents who responded to the survey who report that their schools facilitated their involvement as a means of improving services divided by the total number of parents who responded to the survey times 100. So it's a pretty simple calculation. Next slide. So under IDEA, states can do sampling as long as they submit a description of the sampling methodology and how the design will yield valid and reliable estimates. So every parent of a student with disability does not need to be surveyed every year. The state can develop a sampling plan. And I just have to say, someone who's been looking at these for years, I've had, my daughter had an IEP for probably about 6 years before I was finally selected as a parent to fill out the Indicator 8 survey. And because it's something I work with every day, I was so excited when I got that survey. But sometimes it can take a little while. You'll see why as I go through how sampling happens. And so for the survey, anytime the state creates a new or revises the survey, they must submit a copy of that. And then they also need to report their response rate. So the number of parents who responded to the survey divided by the number of parents who received the survey. And on the report, this response rate is reported and it's compared to the previous year's response rate, and the state must provide a description of strategies that will be used to increase the response rate, particularly for groups that are underrepresented. Next slide. So when a sampling plan is put together by the state, the sample of parents receiving the survey, it must be representative of the students with disabilities in the school district. So that's a representation of the disability categories that are represented in that school district, a representation across grade levels, so the age of the student, the race of the student, gender, and then family income. So the sample should pull proportionately from all those different categories. And then the APR requires the LEAs with over 50,000 students must be included in the sample. There are some states that kind of alternate whether or not districts are selected for the survey through years, and so larger districts must be included in the sample. And then in reporting results for small school districts, information shall not be reported that would result in the disclosure of personally identifiable information about individual children, or where the available data are insignificant to yield statistically reliable information. So if you have a small district that maybe only has one student in a specific disability category, and reporting results in the report would show clearly, something about that one student so that other people would, who, may be familiar with the school district would be able to know, then that information should not be reported. Next slide. Okay, so just a few more things. There's a few more responsibilities the state must do, and they must analyze the response rate to identify potential non-response bias and take steps to reduce any identification bias and promote response from a broad cross-section of parents. So basically, when the state reviews the response rate on the parent surveys, if there is a certain demographic group that is underrepresented in the responses, then the state must take steps to try and increase response rates from that demographics. And And that way making sure that the responses represent all children in the state receiving services under IDEA. And when the state reports results on the parent survey, they must consider race and ethnicity and then choose at least one other demographic category. So that could be age, disability, gender, geographic location, or another demographic category approved through the stakeholder input process. Okay, that was kind of a whirlwind, but those are the requirements that the state must do under IDEA when gathering information about parent involvement. I am going to turn it over to Shasta now to talk a little bit more specifically about what Kentucky does. And I believe she's also going to talk a little bit more about parent involvement as well. But if you have any questions about what parent involvement looks like and the requirements for federal reporting, feel free to drop that in the chat and I will respond.
All righty. Thanks, everybody. The good news is for you guys, I'm going to try to talk while I get my screen pulled up here. The good news is that Greg and Brenda have pretty much told you all the things, so you won't have to hear me talk for too long. And also, I won't have to talk as fast, so my Appalachia won't come out as thick because I won't be speaking as quickly. So let me share my screen here. All righty. You guys see? You're good? Seeing my screen? Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm Shasta Hensley, and as Alicia already shared, I work in OSEEL in the Division of IDA Implementation in Preschool. I have several roles. My primary role is State Transformation Specialist, but Family School Partnerships is another part of my brain, so that's what you get to hear about today. Just a little bit about me really quickly, just so you guys know, in addition to being all of those things here at the KDE, I'm also the parent of a child with a disability. And as they said, we're going to talk about Family Engagement Indicator 8 really quickly. Brenda gave you guys a really good definition of defining of parent and family. And I just want to kind of highlight, that, we all have sort of our own definition of what parent and family means. My favorite is Karen Matt's definition, which is any adult caretaker that rises up to take care of our children. And those people should be included and counted and valued and respected, because what we know in Kentucky is a state that has a very high rate of grandparents raising children or grandchildren, is that sometimes parent doesn't necessarily mean parent. But we also know as directors and leaders is that we do have to make sure that we are compliant with what parent means when it comes to situations like who can sign certain documents and those sort of things. And so we have to find the balance between those two things. And you can always find what the IDA and what the KRs, the regulations say around what definition of a parent is. Those are linked in the PowerPoint. So when you guys get that, you're welcome to explore that. I would also say that we are very fortunate here in Kentucky to have a really great parent training center, family training center through the Pritchard Committee. And they have a really great definition that they co-created with a lot of parents, families, schools, community members. And that's what you kind of see here. And it's kind of like what you've already heard, or there's some like key phrases that come out of that definition. And it's things like it's productive, it's equitable, it's inclusive, it promotes learning. It's reciprocal, it's meaningful, right? So all of those kind of things. So it's not just sort of like what Brenda said, it's not, family engagement is not just the PTA families or the families who show up on science night, right? There's lots of ways that families can be engaged, and there's lots of ways that we can think about and define what family engagement is. So why are family school partnerships important in special education specifically? Again, we know that there's regulations, right? We know that there's these compliance pieces. And so we have both the ESSA and for us as special educators and leaders in special education, what regulations say, what the KAR say. And again, I encourage you to go and read like the whole thing. These are just some highlights that you see here on the screen. So, that ESSA says that, family engagement is with families, it's all parents, it's meaningful. And something that Greg pointed out that's really reflective in ESSA is that it's the LEA's responsibility to build the capacity of schools for planning and implementing effective involvement. Again, KRs, our regulations, our Kentucky regulations are very reflective of the IDA, which have already been shared with you from Brenda. So I'm not going to go over that. But again, I encourage you to go there and check those out for yourself. Also, why is family engagement important? Why does it matter? Already been shared with you guys, but there is a ton of research that talks about when families and schools are in, solid, strong partnerships together, that we do see improved student outcomes, and that's increased achievement. We see better social emotional skills. We see increased graduation rates, and we see better attention during instructional tasks and improved teacher-student interactions, which we could all use a little bit more of, based on what I'm hearing from my teacher friends. And I would like to point out too that another reason that family engagement is so important is because it's sort of a conflict preventative, just like Greg was saying. And this is actually directly from Cadre, and it says, perhaps the best and easiest way to manage conflict is to prevent it in the first place. And by increasing the capacity of systems and individuals to meaningfully collaborate and problem solve, that offers a proactive strategy. Cadre has this really cool continuum, again, go check it out, that talks about those levels of intervention. And you can see that as part of that prevention stage, right before we get all the way down here to legal review, which sometimes is necessary, but we don't want to go there, is that prevention part. And you can see family engagement is right up there. It's the very first thing that's noted in that prevention piece. But for you guys, I'm thinking about some practical things. And as Alicia said, like, what's your one thing you're going to do? What's that one actionable step you want to walk away with? And so this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but here are just some ideas on things that you could do, some actionable takeaways that you can do as a dose to strengthen those family school partnerships within your district. And so that's finding and creating your team, exploring the resources that are out there, evaluating your own practices, and then supporting parent capacity. And I'm going to go into each one of these a little bit deeper. So first, family engagement is big and it's huge, and there's no way that you can do it on your own, like most things in special education. But I really want to encourage you guys to find or create your team to help you think through your engagement system, so to speak. Maybe it's thinking about who's already working on family school partnerships in your district, like who's already there. Are there some, SBDM people? Are there some, Title I friends? Are there some, who's already working on that? And like maybe there's some partnership that could happen in there. We know that oftentimes special education sort of gets left out or pushed to the side. And so as DOST, you guys have the awesome privilege and responsibility of making sure that that doesn't happen. And so one way to do that is either to find the team or create the team, and making sure that special education is a part of that conversation around family engagement. And then just saying who is willing to systematically improve our partnerships within special education. There's so many amazing parent engagement resources. I joked with the team earlier and said, I just need somebody to give me like a 6-hour workshop. So we could go through all of these great resources, but the good news is that they're all online already and they're all free. So you don't even have to have me really, but there really are some great resources out there around parent engagement and family school partnerships. These are just a few. If you're like a modules person, like you like to go through the things, Iris Center has some really great modules. They're also very teacher friendly. So if you're thinking like PLC type of things, in my mind, the ones from the Iris Center are very PLC friendly or training friendly. Of course, our Kentucky Collaborative for Families and Schools is Kentucky centered. Again, it is co-created by Kentucky schools, teachers, leaders, and families. NASCI is a national association, and again, just so many amazing resources. And then, of course, OSEEL has some really great, whether it be articles or research, and tools and tips around family engagement and family involvement as well. Another thing that you can do, like an actionable step, is just reflecting on your own practices, policies, and procedures. And kind of like I said earlier, as a DOSH, you get both the privilege and responsibility of impacting those practices, policies, and procedures. And so we're going to look at a few of those. And again, not an exhaustive list, but a few things to kind of think about. And so one is just thinking about, what is sort of your procedures, your expectations around ARC meetings. As a dose, you can have a very strong and positive influence on those processes within your district. Thinking about what happens before the ARC, what happens during the ARC, and what happens after. Thinking about what needs to be documented, communicated, and trained. I know my systems brain, thinks about the importance of making sure that things are not only documented, but also that they're then communicated and that our teachers are trained on those things as well. So just going to look at maybe before an ARC, right? So scheduling, right? Is it practice in your district that when you're going to have an interpreter, that you've allowed for additional time? Because, as a former EL teacher and as a ELs with disabilities consultant, one of the things that I encourage you to think about and to recognize is that when you have those interpreters, again, everything has to be said twice. So just making sure that all of your families have equitable access to engage in that ARC conversation. As we know, making sure that our times are doing what we can reasonably, making sure that our times to meet the needs of the whole team. Your procedures, right? So we know that when we go to really good meetings, right, there's things that we like at good meetings. We like ground rules. We like to be greeted. We like our norms. We like our agenda. That's how we like things. We like a shared screen. And so those are things that can also be implemented at an ARC meeting. I'll speak really briefly about that shared screen and how powerful that is. At one of the schools I was at many, many moons ago, our ARC chair, one of the best things that she did, and was so well received from our parents as well as our teachers, was that sort of as she had that IEP and we were working on in that and co-creating that IEP, she had like a projector on a smart board, and she kind of went through that so that even as it was being developed, the entire team had the ability to kind of see what was going on. It wasn't just handed to the parents after, which was really cool. Communication is really super important. And I always say, making sure that your teachers know to check those call logs before an ARC meeting, because it's always challenging when you get into an ARC meeting and find out that there's been like 7 phone calls made home from a different teacher and they haven't been positive. Well, that teacher's likely going to come into that ARC meeting, or that parent may come into the ARC meeting already feeling a little bit negative about what's going to happen. So even just like making sure that your call logs reflect both positive and negative interactions. And also, do a pre-ARC check-in with families. So checking in with families, a day or two before that ARC and say, hey, we're going to meet in a couple days. Do you need anything? Are there any questions? Is there anything you want me to be thinking about in preparation for that? Can make families feel like their voice is valued. Finally, just capacity, right? Thinking about things like tip sheets. I think as an example, when you have a family who is going to be brand new to the IEP process, the ARC process, it's their very first IEP. There are really amazing tip sheets for parents around what is an IEP. There's really great things around what is the least restrictive environment. They're all out there. They're all free. They're printable. So those kinds of things can be really helpful to send home in advance. A draft IEP, again, so that families kind of know like what, making sure you write draft over it like 1,000 times, but, so that families can have the opportunity to look at that before they get into that ARC meeting can be really helpful to families so that they can meaningfully engage in that process. Again, communication, making sure your communication is meaningful and two-way, that it's ongoing. Are we only communicating when things aren't working? That is like a prerequisite for conflict. If families are only hearing from us, from the school, from our teachers when things aren't going well and aren't working, it really sets families in this space to ask, well, is the school actually for my kid or not? Thinking about what the family's preferred mode of communication is. Do your teachers know, the different ways that their families like to communicate in terms of, do they like to be, through a Remind app? Does that work for families? Do they prefer the phone calls? And I also think it's really super important, these last two, Who are we not hearing from and why? If you have families who consistently maybe aren't showing up at ARCs, I think it's really important for us to ask why that is. Is it that they've had such negative experiences in the past, or that they haven't felt like their voice was valued in the past? And maybe that mindset needs to be sort of reset, and that relationship needs to be rebuilt. And also, I think it's important to think about, do families know how to contact you? And I know that can seem like kind of risky, but I have heard of several docents who say, no, I sent home a parent letter at the very beginning of the school year because I don't want them contacting KDE. I want them contacting me first. And so she kind of like set that up at the very beginning. To make sure that her families knew how to contact her and when they could contact her, and some things that they might want to contact with her about. And I think she talked about how that was such a great move for her, because it really, again, sort of helped her families know that they had someone to talk to when they felt that things weren't going well. Again, thinking about mindset, Greg talked about this earlier about how the mindset of the teachers has in the school has a huge impact on that partnership approach. And we always say with, not for. We do things with families, not for them. The dual capacity framework has just such a great job of explaining this mindset of this with, not for, and just thinking about how your protocols and your procedures should reflect and embrace that equitable approach to partnership. There's different ways that you can partner with families to find out your engagement gaps, surveys, focus groups, conversations. Those can all give you as a dose, valuable data around how you can improve and grow those family school partnerships. If you're like me and you love a rubric, you love like circling, if you're a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1, there are some really good family engagement rubrics out there. Again, this is not exhaustive. These are just a few. There's the 4 versions of family school partnerships. There's the Kentucky Family and School Partnership Self-Assessment, and there's a Leading by Convening Blueprint. And so depending on how deep you want to go, I kind of put these in order from like left to right. Left is like a 1-pager, right is like a whole thing, right? So depending on how far you want to go and how deep you want to go into that, but again, with your team, knowing where to start and just sort of asking yourself those questions. And these aren't necessarily special education specific, but they can help you think about in terms of what you can do as a dose, or maybe where some of that room for growth might be. It's also really important to support parent capacity for partnership. As Greg and Brenda both shared, it's really important to make sure that parents have the skills and tools that they need to partner with you, because when they do, they're more likely to be an advocate. And we all love that for you and for your school and for your district. So these are just some tools, some resources that support parent capacity. Again, things like tip sheets, parent guides, all of those sorts of things. Because, in chatting with those, they say, parents understand there's a process for this. I can't just give your kid an IEP. So sometimes some of these things, some of these resources and tools can really help parents in understanding that it's not just because you just don't want to and you don't care about their kid, but really it is that there are certain ways that you just have to do things, but also sorts of explains that and takes away some of that scary factor away from that fear factor away from parents. Okay, so that was that. Really quickly, into indicator 8, which goes with this family engagement, this whole family engagement thing. I'm not going to go into this too deep because we do have a video and a slide deck. So actually just this year, again, because of feedback from our doses, there is a video guide around indicator 8 in Kentucky. And so you can go and watch that video, or you can go check out that slide deck. It really kind of overviews it for you. It's like 11 minutes or something like that. Again, it's part of our SPPAPR. One thing I will note is that in Kentucky, we do not use sampling. And Brenda is right that some states do use sampling. In Kentucky, we want to hear from all of our families. We don't use sampling. And so when we send out that survey to DOS and to preschool coordinators, we want you guys to send that to all your families from preschool to high school. I'll also note too that for, in Kentucky, some things that you guys have access to, your response rate can be provided to you during and after the survey. I've heard from multiple, so I'm the indicator 8 lead. And so I hear from probably a different dose every single day. Hey, what's my response rate? And so we can give that to you sort of like in real time. So if you're interested to know what your current response rate is, and response rate is just the number of families that we've heard from in your district, right? So that's not how they're responding. We don't know that until after the survey, but we do know how many have responded so far. And so that's something that you can request. What's super cool though is that after the survey and all of the boxes are checked and all of the data is tallied up, we can give you guys district level reports. So we can say, in your district, here's your response rate, but also here's how your families responded to question 1, question 2, question 3. So we can give you reports on that. So if you're interested in that, you can email me and I'll make sure that you can get that information. A few like pro tips, and some of these are directly from directors who I know have had some really good success on growing that response rate and representativeness. So one, make sure that you're providing the survey in more than one way and not a week before the window closes. Don't do that. Don't wait till the week before it closes. We open the survey in January. It doesn't close until June, but school gets out in May. So if you haven't started sending that out yet or sending out those reminders about that yet, you might, want to go ahead and hop on that. But again, I know that there was actually one of our other doses. She's done an amazing job trying all these different ways and then like collecting data on each way that of how many responses she's getting per way to find out what works for her families. But using things like Remind plus your one call plus an email or a phone call. And that phone call piece is really important because the most successful method that we have seen so far, according to what our dose are telling us, is that partnering with case managers. And so in another district, there was a dose who said, hey, case manager, list out your kiddos, give me a little check mark if you've contacted personally that family. And we know that personal contact is really meaningful for families. And it's just as quick as saying, hey, I'm going to send, there's a survey coming home and here's the QR code, so that you can log right into that. Do you have any questions? It's really important. Has proven to be a very great way to increase that response rate. I'm going to say phone a friend. Again, there are other doses out there, Surtax, your EL coordinators, if you have a large population of EL families, to say, hey, help me do this, help me be great, right? How can we make sure this response rate gets increased? Utilizing the parent letter, that we, as part of that process, it has that QR code. It sort of explains the parent letter. So if there are pieces of that you want to like snip out for like an email, you want to say, this is the best section for my families. You want to send the whole thing home, do whatever works for you. And you can always do it after an ARC. I would note though, right? So that's one option again, but keeping in mind that we only have our survey open from January to June. But then also, this isn't families' favorite way. When we've asked families about this isn't their favorite because they feel either pressured to respond in the positive. They kind of fear that you're going to like look at their responses on the laptop and then there's going to be some retaliation if it's not positive. And also they worry that maybe they can't give the most authentic answers sometimes. So that's not family's preferred way. Generally speaking, that doesn't mean that you can't do it, but it's just something to kind of keep in mind. I think this is final, that again, it opened on January 15th. It closes on June 30th. It is available in 6 languages, currently. And then also all of your business, all the stuff you need is in the Dose One Stop. So you can go there and get that, or if you don't want to trudge through that and you just need something very specific, you can always email me and I'll make sure you get what you need. Okay, I hope my Appalachia didn't come out too bad, and I still feel like I was fast. Does anybody have any questions? I'm gonna stop sharing so I can see the chat too. Alicia gave some really solid advice there. So where do we go to request our response rights? Just email me. And it's through our partners at the Human Development Institute who help us manage our data, but I will make sure that you get contacted with Tony Lobianco. So just the easiest thing, just email me and we'll get you where you need to go.
Shasta, can I just add one comment?
Yeah.
I want to reinforce what you said, that family engagement is not a special ed responsibility, it's an LEA responsibility. And when you're building your team with general ed folks. I mean, many districts have that. I think one of the things I observed in 2004 when IDEA was reauthorized, a subtle shift occurred, which not everybody realizes, is we said there's not special ed kids and general ed kids. They're all general ed students. Some of them need special education. And so I think changing the mindset of our regular ed's quote staff to see our kids as all our kids, I think is an important piece. So I just wanted to reinforce that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Norm, I think we're turning it back to you.
Yep,
And Frank?
Frank's going to take over. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Great to see you all today. I'm sorry for my kind of dark picture. I've got a little bit of sidelight coming in. My camera won't pick me up, but I'm here. Frank Podobnik. I'm actually live and work out of Montana, even though I work for TACE. And like others here, I have a background. I've been in special education for about 30 years. Started as a school psychologist. And parent. I'm also a parent of kids with disabilities. Did manage the dispute resolution system in Montana for a little while before I became the state special education director here, and then came to work at TACE. So I'm going to talk to you today about the formal dispute resolution activities under IDEA, real briefly, really focusing most on the due process hearing request aspect of it. But Brindley, if you would, I just want to point out, so in the regulations, in the IDEA regulations, section 300.500 through 0.520 is where the due process procedures are, procedural safeguards. And then in the discipline procedures, there's also some specifics around, for example, expedited due process hearings and those requirements. So, Brindley. I want to just say, in the IDEA, dispute resolution in a formal way is designed to protect the rights of parents and students and to provide mechanisms for schools and families to resolve disputes. And there are four processes that are identified in the regulations: written state complaints, mediation, due process complaints, which are in Kentucky referred to as due process hearing requests, and then resolution sessions or resolution meetings, which are part of the due process proceedings. But what I want to really focus on and say to you is something you've heard multiple times today already. There are specific processes, but the most effective strategies for dealing with disputes in IDEA or in special education or in life in general is communication. Greg talked about it. Shasta just talked about more about this. Establishing good relationships with families and communicating with each other in clear and effective ways, and being able to step back from some of the hurt that goes with accusations or some of that, and to be able to effectively communicate. Over the course of my career, I've had the opportunity to facilitate a number of IEP meetings, and one of the things that I can tell you is in all of those cases, the underlying issue, as Greg pointed out, was communication. You would not believe how many meetings I sat in where a parent and the school staff were saying exactly the same thing, but they could not hear each other say it. They could not step back from their defensive position enough to actually recognize that they were in agreement. And so I just can't stress enough the importance of that communication. And the ability that you have to resolve things in a method that can build a relationship with the family. Rarely unless you you have a parent who has filed a complaint during the spring semester of a child's senior year, you're going to have to work with this family in the future. They're not going to go away, right? So you have to strive to resolve these things in a way that builds that relationship and doesn't alienate people and break things down. And so we're able to continue to engage. And as Shasta just said, one of the best ways you can do this is to work with your staff to effectively engage parents in the IEP process. You know, it's important to have parents engaged in school and at every level, but it is critical in this respect that you're communicating well with parents prior to the IEP meeting, that they don't come to the school and learn something, that they know everything they need to know coming in so that they have time to process it and think about it. So they are partners in the meeting and not just someone who's being reported to and, asked for a signature. They're really there to help you program for their child. And so it's important to include them in that way. So Brinley, if you would, I just wanted to say that just because what you've heard so far today is really critical in avoiding what we're going to talk about now. Because what we're going to talk about now is not where you want to go, I promise you. As someone who has had a due process complaint filed against me as the state director, I I have to tell you, it isn't a pleasant thing, and there's nothing good that's going to come of it. But it is very difficult to step back from that feeling threatened and all of those things. So the more you can do up front, the better you are. So specifically out of those four things, we wanted to talk today about due process complaints. A due process complaint or a hearing request, due process hearing request can only be filed by a parent or a public agency. Interesting thing that a written state complaint, which is another one of the procedures, can be filed by anybody. But only the parent or public agency can file a due process request, and it has to be around the identification, the evaluation, the placement, or the provision of FAPE to the child. Okay. The complaint they are time barred, meaning they have to allege a violation that occurred within 2 years from the date of the complaint is filed, or the date that the parent knew or should have known that there was a violation. Okay. We won't spend too much time on parsing that right now, but just know that there's a 2-year look back generally in terms of due process complaints. Okay. The content of the complaint is pretty straightforward. It's laid out in the regulations. The state, the state provides a sample form. So if a parent or a school district is going to file a complaint, there's a form that's available on the state website that you can download. That's a fillable form that contains all of this boxes for all of these pieces of information so that it is the complaint is valid. The regulations require a description of the problem and the facts relating to the problem and a proposed resolution to the extent known. And one of the things I'll say is that sometimes parents don't know necessarily what the actual requirements are. And so most of the parents, I promise you, unless they're me, who's a school psychologist who lives in the regulations, most of the parents have never read the IDEA regulations. They don't know what the regulation actually requires for you to do. What they know is that they don't like what's happening, or they see something that they believe their child needs that isn't happening. So sometimes these descriptions can be a little vague or whatever, but that doesn't necessarily invalidate the complaint. And there's been some guidance from OSEP and case law that says, you can't necessarily just reject a complaint because the parent didn't articulate an appropriate resolution. They may not know what the resolution is. They're not educators there for the most part, right? So just know that. But the process begins when that complaint is filed with the state, if you would, Brindley. The state will notify if the parent has not provided the copy of the complaint to the LEA, the state will do that. When you receive as a school district an LEA, you have a period of time to take some action. The first is that the regulations say that if you have not already sent a prior written notice regarding the subject of the complaint. So if the parent if you evaluate a child and you hold the ARC meeting, you decide the child qualifies, after that, you provide a prior written notice to the parent, right? That describes all the things that you considered, all the steps that you took, all the things that were considered that were rejected, right? The 7 parts of prior written notice. You have all of those pieces. If you have already provided that to the parent, and the parent comes and files a due process complaint around the identification of their child, then you don't have to take this step. But if you have not provided that, then the district is required to do that. So, excuse me, it's just something to be aware of. You can't, districts get themselves in trouble sometimes because they just don't respond right away. They receive a complaint and they're not sure how to proceed. They are waiting to hear from their attorney, whatever. There's some delays in there. Be careful about that. There are timelines here that have to be followed. Brindley, if you would. Okay. So once the complaint is filed, within 15 days, the regulations say that within 15 days of receipt of the complaint and prior to a hearing, the school district must convene a meeting with the parents and relevant members of the IEP team to talk about the complaint and the facts that are basis of the complaint and try and resolve the dispute. This is called a resolution session. Okay. Now, this resolution session can be waived if both parties agree to waive it. And it can be waived also if both parties agree to engage in mediation. But I'm going to go back to what we were talking about, everything that you've heard so far today. This resolution session, you need to look at this as your last opportunity to resolve or to engage this conflict in an effective way and to build on that relationship and to actively, meaningfully involve the parent in this process of developing an IEP for their child. It is your last chance. Because after this, okay, when you go into due process, you're in a formal hearing and it is very adversarial, and the relationship you have with that family will never be the same again. Okay. And so instead of automatically saying, what, we've tried everything, we're gonna waive this, if the parent agrees, I would encourage you to take advantage of this one last opportunity. It's there for you. It's built in. If the resolution has not happened within 30 days, if you haven't been able to come to any resolution, then the hearing moves forward. And that's when the 45-day timeline for the hearing begins. So the 45 days timeline for a hearing begins either when the parties agree to waive, the parties agree to mediation but cannot come to a mediated agreement, their mediation fails, right? Or if either party says we will do mediation, but then they say no, we're not, we're withdrawing from mediation, then the due process hearing process 45-day clock starts. So a resolution session does result in a legally binding agreement between the parties, and that agreement can be enforced in any state or federal district court. So if you come to an agreement and resolution with the family and then the district does not follow through, the parent can take that to court and force compliance with that agreement. So just know that. And then that then leads to the due process hearing. And I'm not going to go through all the intricacies of this. I don't know if Carol Ann will share more about that when she talks to you in a minute. But the key things here is that a hearing has to be conducted by an impartial hearing officer who is not an employee of the school district or the state, and that doesn't have any interest that conflicts with their objectivity. That's that's something that essentially the hearing officer gets to decide if they have any conflict with, or you can ask for recusal. But the other part of this that's important and for both sides to understand is that new issues can't come up during the hearing. So the parent can't complain about one issue and get to the hearing and then bring in 3 other things. Okay, those require their own separate process. And so it is about the issues that are identified. That's so that everybody knows going in what exactly the issues are and what you're going to be addressing. Okay. And as I said, I'm not going to spend a ton of time on, the hearing, due process hearing officer has great latitude in terms of extending deadlines and discovery rules and all of that stuff. But when you get to this point, you will have representation and they will help you through that process. So that's it in a nutshell, really. They gave me 15 minutes, but I didn't think I was going to take that long. So we're gaining ground here. We're going to give Carol Ann a little bit of extra time. And we're going to give you guys some time at the end to ask some extra questions. So if there are no questions right now, we'll move on.
All right, I will things around a little bit. Okay, I cannot see you all, so please feel free to jump in and interrupt me if you have questions. I know sometimes I have time for questions built in at the end, but sometimes it's a little bit easier if you can ask as we go. So feel free to jump in at any point in time and just interrupt me. It's fine. My name is Carol Ann Morrison, as Alicia introduced me earlier, and I'm the director for our division of IDEA monitoring and results. And part of the work that we lead within our division is dispute resolution. And so Frank did a great job of introducing dispute resolution and some of the requirements that are included in the federal regulations. And then I want to share with you just some specifics for Kentucky. If I can advance my slide. There we go. All right. So first, I want us to kind of think about what happens if there is a disagreement. There are times when we will have parents call us at KDE in our office, OSEEL, and they will have a concern. They're concerned. They've had a disagreement with someone within the school district, and they are seeking help. And so anytime that occurs, the first thing we're going to do is suggest that parent first contacts the local director of special education. So we will provide them with your contact information. If they don't have that, we'll give them the phone number, the name of the director in the district. And we always send it back to that local level so that you have an opportunity to engage with that parent and work with them to try to come to a resolution and to handle that disagreement. We find that sometimes when parents call, they've been frustrated by something that's happened at the school, and the special education director isn't even aware of it yet. They don't even know that it has, that there's been an issue. And so this gives you an opportunity as that local director to engage with the parent and to utilize some of these strategies that have been talked about and discussed earlier in the presentation for some conflict resolution. So that's kind of the first step. If that communication doesn't resolve the disagreement and the parent says, I still have a disagreement, I need to know what my options are, we do share with them the dispute resolution options. And just as Frank had shared with you, we have those for our state, mediation, a formal written complaint, due process complaint, which we call due process hearing request, just to kind of differentiate between that and the formal written complaint. And as Frank shared, part of that due process hearing request is the resolution session. We have a webpage on the KDE website that is dedicated to dispute resolution. And so you can find additional information there about each of these processes. The first one I mentioned is mediation, and this is a voluntary process. And so both parties have to agree to mediation. So the school district and the parent would have to agree to engage in mediation. So if one of those parties says, no, I'm not interested, I don't want to mediate, then mediation does not take place. We do have a mediation request form that's located on that dispute resolution website that can be completed and signed by both parties and then submitted to KDE. Our Office of Legal Services actually helps us to handle the processes around mediation and due process hearing requests. So that form actually is submitted to them, but then they will collaborate with us in OSEEL to keep us up to date about what is occurring through mediation and due process hearings. The formal written complaint is what we are more hands-on with in our division. And that is a written statement that alleges that a school district violated a requirement of state or federal special education law. That complaint must be filed with KDE within 1 year of the alleged violation. So we only go back 1 year with formal complaints. And it can be filed by anybody. It can be the parent of the student with a disability, it can be an organization, or it can just be any person who believes IDEA has been violated. Now, I will share that if we receive a complaint from a complainant that is not the parent, then we will not release any personally identifiable information to that complainant unless the parent provides us with a signed FERPA release. So we will always let the parent know that we have received that complaint. We will let them know that if they want the complainant to receive information about the complaint, they can fill out a form and sign for a FERPA release. But if they choose not to, then we inform that complainant that they will not, after the initial notification that we've received the complaint, they will not receive any additional documentation related to that complaint. We do have a model state complaint form, and that's available on our website. That form does not have to be used to file a complaint. We will accept complaints in any written format as long as they have all of the required components, and I'll share that information with you in just a few minutes. But the form is just a model to help support complainants in ensuring that they have all of the required components included. So here is a list on the screen for you of the required components that have to be included in a written state complaint. The first is a statement that the school district or public agency has violated federal or state IDEA regulations. And that's something that we take a look at when we receive that complaint, as well as all of these other items. The facts, there has to be a signature and contact information of the complainant. The name and residence of the child, name of the school. You can see all of those listed through there. I'm not going to read each one of them to you. I will note that in addition to each of these, the complainant is required to provide a copy of the complaint to the local school district. So you should receive that, a copy of that complaint when it is filed. The complaint can be filed in, there are different ways that a complainant can file a complaint. They can do that electronically through email. They can fax the complaint to us. They can send the complaint through U.S. postal mail. And we have some individuals that will actually hand deliver the complaint. They will show up in our Frankfurt office and will deliver that complaint to us, that written document. Here I have just a few bullets to kind of outline the formal written complaint process. So a few things to note is that with a formal written complaint, there is a 60-day timeline. That's calendar days, not school days. So there is a 60-day timeline from the date that we receive the complaint with all of the required components to the date that we have to have everything finalized and a report issued to the parties for that. There is some allowance in the regulations for an extension of that timeline, which occurs occasionally on a case-by-case basis, but typically it's the 60-day timeline that occurs. The first thing we do when we receive a formal complaint in our office is we will date stamp the date received, and then we conduct what we call a jurisdictional review. And really all that means is we are reviewing the complaint to see if it includes all of the required components. So we're checking things such as, is there a signature? Did the complainant sign it? Sometimes they'll just type their name. They'll send us an electronic version and they'll just type their name. That's not a signature. Now they can sign it electronically, but it has to be an actual signature. Sometimes the issues that they include in the complaint are not related to the IDEA. So that they have to allege that there's been a violation of special education law. Now, they don't have to come out and tell us the specific regulations or the specific law that was violated, but based on the information they provide, it has to be something related to the IDEA. Sometimes we receive complaints of something that has happened in the school district that it's really outside of our jurisdiction because it's not related to the IDEA. Once we do that review, if all of the required components are included in the complaint, then we send out a notification letter to both parties. And when I say parties, I mean the complainant and then the local school district. We include the superintendent of the local school district and the special education director. And that notification outlines several things. It outlines the process that's going to take place for the formal written complaint. It also outlines the issues that were alleged in the formal complaint, and those are the specific issues that we'll be investigating through the process. It has a lot of timelines included in there for the process, and also includes documentation that the district is required to submit to us by a specific date. The other thing that will be included in that notification letter is the district's opportunity to complete a self-investigation. And that is where the district has the opportunity to go through. We have a template for this that you can use that kind of helps lead you through this. And you can look into these issues and investigate yourself and provide us and the complainant with a copy of a report based on that investigation. And then we are able to utilize that information along with other documentation we review and interviews to put all of that together to finalize the complaint investigation. The parent does have an opportunity to respond once to the district self-investigation. And then we complete our full investigation once those steps take place, determine the decision. If there is any violations of the IDEA, we will issue corrective action within that report that we issue. And then there is also an appeal process. Either party can appeal the decision within 15 business days of that decision being rendered, and they can submit that appeal to the Commissioner of Education. Now, I will say this, that's a lot of information right now. I know it's a lot to take in, especially if you are new and this is a new process. What I will say to you is I just wanted to kind of give you an overview today. But if you find yourself, maybe 6 months down the road and you receive a formal written complaint, or you receive a request for one of these other types of dispute resolution, and you're thinking, man, I know we learned about this, but I can't remember exactly how this works or what I need to do, please call or email me. I'd be happy to talk to you and explain the process, help you to remember what it is that is going to happen, what you may need to do, and just so you know what to expect. I always feel better about something if I know what's coming and what to expect. And so I'm happy at any time to review this process with you and share that information with you. So please feel free to reach out if this comes up at a later date and you need that information. All right, I'm not going to share a lot about the due process hearing request because that's what Frank went into detail with you about in his presentation. I will point out that he shared with you that under federal regulation, due process complaints go back and can look at things that have happened within the last 2 years. In Kentucky, we have a statute that actually puts in place a 3-year time limit. So the due process hearing must be requested in writing and must be filed within 3 years of the date the parent or district knew or should have known about the issue. So that is unique within Kentucky statute. We also have a form available online to request a due process hearing. And then this is just a little bit of information about the resolution session. You've already heard about this, so I'm not going to go into great detail there. That will save us a little bit of time. Does anybody have questions related to dispute resolution before I move on to the next section?
Carol Ann, this is Alicia.
Yes.
I do have a comment. I received my first complaint, due process complaint, 6 weeks into being a new director. And it was from a community agency who filed that. So I want you to pay attention to, you have an opportunity to self-investigate. That's something I somehow missed. So KDE came and paid us a visit and did the investigation for us. The other thing that I'd like to mention is sometimes things are happening that are outside of your control. And so sometimes complaints might actually be what happens. And your professionalism and how you handle those within your district can either create a lot of chaos or create a sense of, hey, we're going to be okay and we're going to do what's right to take care of our children, to take care of our students. So that's important to know. But also, you can be the best communicator. And sometimes there's just going to be a complaint. That doesn't mean you don't do all of the things that we've talked about today for communication, but just know it's not the end of the world. You need to be organized when it happens, and you need to make sure that you go through the paperwork that you're sharing and organize everything, make it easy for anybody reviewing that complaint to see the steps that you've taken to provide the right services for a student. And I've had 2 filed against me in my career, and they've made me better. They've made me a better educator. They've made me a better communicator. And one I did okay on, the other one I did not, but that's just how that worked. So thank you, Carol Ann, for sharing that information. But you all, what I want you to recognize is you're not alone. And if you do get a complaint, please reach out to Carol Ann, and she can help guide you into making it as seamless and as smooth as possible for you. Okay, I'll stop talking.
Thanks for sharing that, Alicia. That's really important. And I did want to note that too, and forgot about it, that we know and understand that sometimes you do everything right. You do everything you can, and you still end up in dispute resolution. And so we know that that happens. Just because a formal complaint is filed doesn't mean that you've done anything wrong. That will all come out through the investigation. And so those are some really good points. I'm glad you made those. All right. If no other questions, I'm going to move on to my last section, and I'm going to try to go through this quickly so that we have plenty of time. But I wanted to share a little bit of information with you today about the compliance record review document. If this is a document that you are not familiar with yet, I would recommend that you look this up. You can find it on our website. The easiest way that I find it is just to type into a Google search bar KDE compliance record review document, and it should come up for you. This is a tool that we have created that we utilize both in our office and our division, and that districts can use to review student due process records, meaning their special education records, to ensure compliance with the IDEA. So this document will help you. It has yes or no questions, or NA when they're not applicable, that will help you walk through the specific Kentucky regulations that you need to meet for compliance. And this is a great tool for you to use to kind of know the status of where you are as a district and how you're doing before you're involved in any type of monitoring activity. So I will share with you, this is the document we utilize when we monitor districts. And so you have full access to it. You have the opportunity to utilize it yourself and to do periodic checks throughout the year to see how you are doing as a district, so that if you were to receive some type of monitoring activity, you already have a pretty good idea of where you are and what you need to work on. The document itself is broken down into some different focus areas. So you can see a list here of the different areas that are included in the document. We do also have separate documents on our website for each of the disability categories for eligibility determinations. So you can actually walk through record review for each specific disability category if you are making eligibility determinations. Those are available as well. So at the beginning of each focus area or section of the document, there is an introduction. It tells you what the focus area is for that section. So here you see a snippet from the meeting notice and membership of ARC. And it will give you regulations that are relevant to that section. You will also see in parentheses previously items and then numbers. We updated our record review document with the 22-23 school year, and actually converted the way that we were numbering the document. We started numbering it to mirror more the Kentucky administrative regulations rather than just having a chronological item number. That for some people that were really used to using this document and had used it for years in the past, they knew those chronological numbers. So we wanted to still note those in this document so you could kind of see what they used to be referred to. There are also any notes that are important for you, and then relevant documents. Where should I look in the student record to find the information I'll need to answer the questions in this section? And then, like I shared, each section of the record review is numbered according to the corresponding Kentucky administrative regulation. For example, the administrative regulation for IEP development and implementation is 707 KAR 1320 section 11. We label that item number as 320 period 1.1. And so we really wanted to help kind of bring that all together so that when you're looking at the record review document and you see an item number, you know the specific Kentucky administrative regulation that is referencing. So annually, districts are required to conduct record reviews specific to the state performance plan, annual performance report, indicators 11, 12, and 13, and then report that data to OSEEL. And so we will be sharing more information with you about that, but that is a requirement for districts. And then in addition to that, districts can choose when and how to conduct any additional student due process record reviews. Districts may choose to complete record reviews ongoing, monthly, or quarterly. So that's really a decision that is left up to you. What I will caution is I will just say I would recommend that you find some type of system for reviewing your special education records and you implement that process. That way you have an idea of what is in those records and where your staff may need training or support to ensure compliance with the IDEA. Here are some ways that districts choose how to conduct additional record reviews. They may conduct some reviews during new special education teacher orientation to kind of help teach and show the new teachers how to do a record review. Some have peer reviews of files. Others will conduct record reviews during IDEA compliance training. And then there are other ways that districts do that as well. Like I shared with you, our office uses the compliance record review document when conducting desk reviews for IDEA programmatic monitoring activities. So this is the same document that we're using that we are sharing with you and making available as a tool for you. Do you have any questions related to the record review document? And again, I'll offer, please call me or email me if you have questions. If you get into some record reviews within your district during the school year and questions come up, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to answer those whenever questions arise. So you have my contact information and feel free to reach out anytime that I can help you. Actually, I have a slide that has the contact info right there. So take a screenshot of that if you want, and feel free to contact me anytime I can help you. I really would like to help and support you as you're in this new role. I'll turn it back over to you, Alicia.
Thank you. And I will say about the record review document, we put that in today's meeting because you should, if you're not already, you should be reviewing records now. You'll have indicator 11, 12, and 13 reporting in the summer, but you can't wait until June to start reviewing those records because you need to review them now in case you need to hold an ARC to make any corrections and make sure that your records are compliant. So that's why we've included that there today. And surrounding you, other doses around you have all kinds of strategies for the best way to review records. I learned the most about how to be more effective and more impactful from the doses that I met with in our monthly dose meetings in co-op at that time, SARTAC now. So Brinley has shared with us that our next session is March 28th from 1 to 3 p.m. Eastern time. And then I think we want to open it up. Do you all have any questions, comments? I see Kim Johnson has her hand up.
Yes, can I get a link to the first workshop that we did? I was unable to attend that one.
So Kim, those are in the dose one stop.
Okay, I was in there the other day. I just didn't happen to see it. Okay.
Yes, and in the preschool coordinator.
Okay, perfect.
One stop.
All right,
So you can find them in both of those places. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. Well, if we don't have anything else, so today, just to kind of summarize, you have received lots of great information about conflict engagement and communication that can serve you well for the rest of your career. You've received strategies for how to increase your participation in Indicator 8. surveys. And so that's here today because you need to be thinking about that now. It's very timely that you start making sure that those surveys are getting out and parents are completing them. You have also received ideas for effective ARC meetings. That's going to be super beneficial as we head into the spring where you likely have a lot of ARC meetings. So go back and think about what Shasta shared with you today about how to make those ARC meetings not only effective, but truly supportive of our families and creating that community with our families for those meetings. That is going to then serve you better. So you're less likely to have a complaint filed against you if you work on that communication in the forefront. And then again, like I said, you do need to be reviewing those records now to prepare for the reporting that you will have this summer. So that is all I have to summarize. Norm?
And Alicia mentioned this in the beginning of the workshop. And one thing we're trying to encourage all of our participants to do is, as you're thinking about the content, and man, you guys heard a bunch of stuff today. Try to identify, if you were to now end the meeting and walk out and run into a teacher or a principal or a parent, and they knew you were on this webinar with us, and they asked you, how was it? What was there something about it that was new, that was useful to you? What would that be? And I know we've got just a couple minutes left, and we want to give some time back to you if we can, but we do want to challenge you to be thinking about this as you're participating in this great opportunity from OSEEL to share information and provide you with knowledge, is to come away from each of these workshops with something to take away. So it's the old takeaway thing. Do any of you have that? Kelly, communication. I love, mind shift. With and not for. Keep plopping those in the chat. And those of you that might be watching this as a recording, we would challenge you to do that too. Listen to these workshops and digest something that you can do starting as soon as you log off, or maybe take home and digest, talk with colleagues, talk with your families, your coworkers, your parents. What a great opportunity to share with your parents that I don't want to be oversimplified, but you're making efforts to really understand what it means to build relationships, and that you value that with your parents. And I think most of you, all of you, are probably doing that. So anyway, just want to put that out there. And I see a bunch of stuff in the chat, so that's great. Thank you for sharing. Continue to share. And Alicia, back to you.
Okay. I think if we don't have any more questions, we can give you a whole 5 minutes back into your day.